our first make or break player. And since you chose this one, John Sheeran, I am going to let you kick this one off with him. Obviously, a guy that has come under a lot of scrutiny. I think a lot of people had hope, in years 2 and 3 that he was going to take that next leap. He did not. And so now the Bengals drafted a 3rd-round guy. Volson himself was a 4th-round guy, so they love those mid-round guys for guard spots. But right now, Volson, who has had the stranglehold on the starting spot, his footing is not on the most solid of ground, I would say.
That's probably an understatement, I think, with Cordell Volson. And I mean, he is like a prime example of why I think it's so important for rational expectations to be had on guys who are just entering the league, who were drafted at certain spots, who are certain players in college, right? Volson, when he entered the league in 2022, like there was promise that, hey, like this guy who's really powerful, played at a really powerful program, at least the FCS level in North Dakota State. And Jackson Carman, obviously the guy that he was competing against, the left guard, like he hadn't proven anything, and he was clearly underwhelming compared to his pedigree. So there was a lot of promise when he was a rookie, and then he just asserted himself and became the starter. And I think that kind of ascension in just a year, it really altered the expectations of who Cordell Volson could be. But at the end of the day, he was still a guy that was projected to be drafted a lot later than the 4th round, but the Bengals really keyed in on him because of a lot of intangible reasons, and I think those intangible reasons have proven to be correct. But work ethic and character can only get you so far if you can't withstand a bull rush, and you can't play with good leverage, you can't play with good hand usage, and that's been a problem for Volson for the last 3 years. That's why he's been a liability for the better part of the last 3 years. But they haven't added any real assets to give him any sort of competition. Like Jackson Carman was his only competition in 2022, and as we've seen, that just hardly is anything. So now that you're entering year 4, and he's played so much that the Bengals can't control this, but his pay is now increased to a little under $4 million this year because of how many snaps that he's played over the first 3 years. And that is a great program that the NFL does for players who are drafted, later in the draft, and they kind of exceed in terms of playing time relative to their draft positioning. So kudos to Volson for staying on the field, staying healthy, being durable as a starter and earning that pay bonus. But it ultimately might come back to haunt him, because if the Bengals, who clearly are asking guys to take less money in terms of how they view them as players and maybe lesser roles, if Volson doesn't win the starting left guard job, or if he doesn't win the starting right guard job, if he's a backup by the end of training camp in the preseason, are they going to look at his salary cap hit of $4 million, nearly $4 million? And are they going to pay that for someone coming off the bench on the offensive line, a position group that they don't normally pay backups a substantial amount of money? I really don't think so. And considering the fact that there's a new offensive line coach here, Scott Pierce is going to do what he can to improve the hand usage and the technique and the overall technical process of Volson as a player. He's going to do what he can in these next few months, but I would say he's on the outside looking in to be a starter because of how much competition, relative to the Bengals standards, competition for Volson. And if he doesn't beat out that competition, he's looking like a really expensive backup for someone who just hasn't improved the way that they wanted him to improve over the past couple of years. So if he doesn't become a starter, he's probably a guy that they're going to look to trade along the lines of roster cutdown, or maybe just a guy that they waive altogether. So he is one of the ultimate make or break players for the Bengals. He's either a starter and proves people wrong this offseason, or he's probably off the team.
It's funny because when we started this series last week, we told you how it spawned from the potential breakout players list that we annually do. And it seemed like he was annually on that list. He's going to take that next step. He's going to take that next step. And it never really happened, between, like you said, withstanding bull rushes, the interior of the offensive line, namely the guards, having issues with stunts and twists and that sort of thing from other defensive linemen. It's been an issue. And it's no secret that this guy, Cordell Volson, was a Frank Pollock guy. And so, I think the coaching staff turnover, particularly at the offensive line spots, that this plays right into the questions with Cordell Volson's future with the Bengals. And like you said, that he would be an expensive backup should he not win the left guard spot. The Bengals seem to be completely enamored with Dylan Fairchild, so much so that, he was drafted maybe a round or so earlier than most projected. but they seem to be pretty ecstatic that they got that guy. And it sounded like when they drafted him, he's going to have every opportunity to win that left guard spot over Cordell Volson going forward. So I'm with you on this. You know, I like you said, I like the character. I like the work ethic. I like the story of, you know, small school guy that was a powerhouse small school, makes it to the big leagues. And you would have liked to have seen him take that next step in his NFL career, but it just hasn't happened. And it hasn't happened whether they flank him with, you know, Ted Karras, solid veteran at center, Orlando Brown at left tackle, whatever the case may be, to steady his play. It just hasn't happened. So like you said, time is running out, new coach. And if the coach isn't overly enamored with what he sees from his, you know, entrenched starter at that spot, I don't know that there's a spot for him.
And I want to reiterate that I think that Cordell Volson is one of their 9 best offensive linemen on this team. And it's not an indictment on the rest of the offensive line. I think that Volson has value as someone that you can bring off the bench in a pinch, or as someone who could do what Matt Lee did last year and be the extra offensive lineman attached to the end. He has that length. He has the athleticism as a run blocker to kind of, you know, work well in those packages. Like, I think that would be a great role for him. Unfortunately, again, I think his own benefit in terms of like his salary being raised, I think that works against him. Like, I just don't know how confident I would be in the Bengals keeping him as someone coming off the bench, even if at that point, like, you're not saving money for any practical reason, right? But the Bengals don't really make these decisions necessarily to make other moves. They would rather just value guys at a certain rate. And if you don't have the value that matches up with what your contract says, they will make a decision for you. And that's what they did with Zach Moss. That's what they did with Geno Stone. That's what they did with Joe Mixon. It's what they might do with Cordell Volson if he doesn't provide value as a starter. So again, like, I'm not saying that Volson should be off the team entirely. I think there's value for him as a backup, but if he was making like $2 million or $1.5 million, I think he would be very safe. But because he's not, like, this is the Bengals. Like, I'm just kind of trying to read the terrain here.
And it's a position that they do not value. I don't know how many times we've said this on this show. They just don't value it. And if you're not making the money that's owed to you, or if you're not, you know, I mean, they had expected him to be, you know, a pretty solid starter at this point, I think. And it's been up and down at best. So make or break year for Cordell Volson. And again, like the guy, somewhat like the potential, and, you know, he was a tackle in college and that sort of thing, but it just hasn't come to fruition.